The text came 2 days after I walked across the stage in my cap and gown. The blue tassel finally swung to the right. My father's message was stark against the glowing screen of my phone. We need $2,100 for your mother's medical expenses. Send it today. There was no congratulations. No, we're proud of you. Just a cold, transactional demand that turned the lingering warmth of my accomplishment to ice. I stared at the words, feeling that familiar, sour twist in my stomach, the one that always arrived whenever my parents seamlessly converted love into a binding obligation. This time, however, the feeling was followed by a strange, solid calm. So, I typed back a simple word, no. He responded within minutes, you're ungrateful, we'll call the police. I dismissed it as another one of his empty threats, a dramatic tool he'd used throughout my childhood to enforce compliance. But this time was different. A sharp, authoritative knock at my apartment door a few hours later announced to police officers, their postures rigid and official. My heart hammered against my ribs as I explained the situation, my voice trembling with a humiliating blend of fear and fury. The officers, after a brief, uncomfortable exchange, left with understanding nods. But the violation lingered in the air like a stain. My name is Nadia. I'm 23 years old, and I just graduated with a degree in business administration. I was raised by immigrant parents who built their lives from nothing on a foundation of monumental sacrifice, and they never, ever let me forget it. Everything we have is because of you, was the family mantra, a phrase that sounded like love, but felt like a chain. It was as if their struggles had granted them a perpetual, unpayable lien on my future and everything I would ever earn. Growing up in that household meant living under the constant, suffocating weight of guilt. My straight A's weren't celebrated as personal achievements. They were presented as minimal repayments on a colossal debt. Gratitude wasn't a kind feeling. It was a currency I was always short on. And their love, it felt less like a gift and more like a high-interest loan I was never done paying back. When graduation approached, a fragile part of me dared to hope it would be different. I sent them invitations, reminders, and excited updates. My mom even told me she had ironed my old honor cords for luck. But on the day of the ceremony, as I scanned the crowd of beaming families and waving signs, I found only 2 empty seats where they should have been. I smiled for the official photos, but the expression felt like a performance, an actor playing the part of a happy graduate in someone else's life. That night, my father finally texted, "We're proud of you," 2 sentences later. He asked for the money. The shift was so jarringly fast it left me dizzy. In one breath, I was their daughter. In the next, I had been reduced to their financial plan. I didn't send the money. Instead, I asked for details. What's the surgery for? How much does it actually cost? He told me to stop being disrespectful. Just do as we ask. He said, "You're our child. It's your duty." The word duty felt like a lock clicking shut. A deep-seated instinct told me something was wrong. I called my aunt, my mother's sister, and after a hesitant pause, she unspooled the truth. The surgery was indeed scheduled, but it was not urgent. There were cheaper, effective options available. But my parents had chosen a more expensive private clinic. They could afford it. They just didn't want to. When my father discovered I had spoken to my aunt, he exploded. "You're betraying the family," he shouted over the phone, his voice cracking with rage. I stayed unnervingly calm. "I'm just trying to understand before I commit," I repeated. He hung up. The next day, my mom called, her voice thick with manufactured tears. "If you loved us, you'd help us," she wept. "We raised you. We sacrificed everything for you." I had heard that line, that very specific emotional calculus, my entire life. But this time, listening to the familiar script, something inside me finally, definitively, snapped. "I do love you," I said, the words feeling fragile but true. But love isn't supposed to feel like a debt. The silence on the other end of the line was heavier than any shout. Then, the calls began not from my parents, but from a chorus of extended family. My phone buzzed incessantly, a hive of accusation. My cousins, aunts, and uncles, their voices a blend of disappointment and fury, became the instruments of my parents' campaign. Your parents are heartbroken, one aunt pleaded. After everything they did for you, another uncle demanded. My name was suddenly on everyone's lips, twisted into a caricature of an ungrateful, selfish daughter. The real shock, however, came with a firm, authoritative knock on my door. Two police officers stood in the hallway, their postures rigid. "We're following up on a report." One said gently, "Your parents have alleged financial abuse." A disbelieving laugh escaped my lips until I saw the sober look in their eyes. "They say you're withholding money they need for urgent medical care," the other officer clarified. My throat went completely dry, the betrayal so profound. It felt like a physical blow. I invited them in and, with trembling hands, explained everything. I told them about the graduation, the demand, the truth about the non-urgent surgery, and the lifetime of emotional ledgers. The lead officer listened quietly, his eyes taking in my composed but shaken demeanor. When I finished, he nodded. "Family disputes get very complicated," he said, his tone neutral. "But legally, you are not required to give them money. You're an adult, and so are they." After they left, I sat on my couch, my entire body shaking. The reality was incontrovertible. They had weaponized the law against their own daughter. But what they didn't know was that their escalation had met my preparation. For years, I had been quietly building a fortress. My phone contained a meticulously organized album of screenshots, every manipulative text, every guilt-tripping voicemail, every financial demand. I had started therapy 2 years earlier, and my therapist had warned me this moment might come. "The system of control will fight back hardest when you finally stop participating," she'd said. "Be ready." She was right. I immediately contacted a friend from university who now worked in family law. She calmly confirmed what the officer had said. Adult children have no legal financial responsibility for their parents. For further validation, I reached out to a financial abuse support hotline. The counselor on the line listened to my story and told me what I had already known in my bones. This isn't about the money. This is about control. For days, the calls and voicemails from my parents continued, each one dripping with the familiar, toxic guilt. "We're your family." My mother cried in one message, "This is your duty." My father stated in another. Then, one night, the final message arrived from him. "Send the $2,100 by Friday, or we're done with you." Something inside me went quiet then. The storm of anxiety stilled. For the first time, I didn't cry or panic. I felt a strange, solid calm. I sat down at my laptop, opened a blank email, and began to write. I wrote everything. I didn't hold back. I started with their empty seats at my graduation. The two voids in the sea of cheering faces that had felt like a physical rejection. I detailed the text message that arrived just 2 days later. A cold, transactional demand that shattered any lingering celebration. I described how they had systematically turned every expression of love into a form of leverage, a currency for control. My fingers flew across the keyboard, each word a stone lifted from my chest. Then, I detached myself and listed the cold, hard facts. I laid out my financial reality like a balance sheet presented in court. I had exactly $3,042 in my savings account. $2,000 of that was my non-negotiable emergency fund, a safety net I had painstakingly built while working part-time. Through my final year, sending them $2,100 would not merely be an inconvenience. It would mean I couldn't pay my rent. I was choosing my own survival over their convenience. And for the first time, I was putting that choice into writing. Finally, I wrote the deepest truth, the one I had been too afraid to voice my entire life. The words felt dangerous and powerful. What you are doing isn't love. It is manipulation. I will not send them money. I will not allow guilt, shame, or threats to control me anymore. I love you. But I refuse to destroy myself to prove it. My hand hovered for a moment over the mouse, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Then, I clicked send. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. It lasted only minutes. My phone erupted, the screen flashing with my father's name. His voice was a blade, sharp and trembling with a rage I could almost touch. "How dare you?" he began, his tone dripping with venom. "You are being disrespectful. After all we have done, you owe us this. You owe us everything." I took a breath. The quiet one I had found earlier still holding me steady. "I don't owe you my life," I said, my voice low but clear, not rising to meet his anger. There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end. I could hear his sharp intake of breath. "That's not love, Dad," I continued, the clarity of it almost breathtaking. "That's ownership." The line went dead. He had hung up. But for the first time, the silence felt like mine. It was not an absence of sound, but a space I had consciously, bravely created for myself. He yelled, his voice cracking through the phone, threatening to sever all ties, to cut me from the family tree as if I were a diseased branch. The old me would have crumbled, begging for forgiveness. The new me simply said, "If that's what you need to do, then I accept it." Then, with a steady hand, I ended the call. The action felt less like hanging up and more like laying down, a boundary made of iron. Hours later, my mother called. Her sobs were a performance I knew by heart, each gasp designed to trigger a specific, conditioned response of pity and obligation. "How could you do this to us, your own family?" she wept. This time, however, the script had been rewritten. I repeated the words my therapist had helped me practice, my voice calm but unyielding. "Mom, guilt is not a form of love. I genuinely hope you get the medical care you need, but not at the cost of my own peace." And before the conversation could spiral further, before the hooks of her words could find their mark, I ended that call too. Then the silence descended. It was a deep, profound quiet that, for my entire life, had been a weapon used to punish me. It was the silence of withheld approval, of simmering disappointment that filled a house until it was suffocating. But now, sitting alone in my apartment, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was full of potential. It wasn't a punishment. It was a reprieve for the first time. It felt like freedom. Days turned into a week, then two. The constant buzz of my phone ceased. I braced myself for the tsunami of guilt I had been taught was my due. But it never arrived. In its place was a strange, buoyant lightness. I could breathe without the weight of their expectations on my chest. Weeks later, a single text arrived from my father. "We're still your parents." It wasn't an apology. It contained no acknowledgement of the pain, the police, or the manipulation. But in the language of our family, where pride was everything, it was the closest he would ever come to admitting a fracture. I read the words, felt the old pull, and then made a conscious choice. I didn't reply. My silence was no longer a reaction. It was my answer. In that moment, I took a deep, cleansing breath and realized the most important thing: the police never came back. Their ultimate threat had been as hollow as their definition of love. The immense power they had held over me for 23 years existed only because my fear had given it a place to live. Saying no hadn't made me a bad daughter. It hadn't made me heartless. It had simply made me free. And if your family has ever used the language of guilt or the leverage of money to control you, please hear this. You are allowed to protect your own peace. You are allowed to build your own stability. You do not owe anyone your well-being, your sanity, or your future just because they have learned to call their control love.